morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Monday. Higher food and oil prices likely pushed inflation above 5% in May.
With no end in sight for the surge of global crude prices, local oil companies are expected to implement another round of major price hikes tomorrow.
Solar power firm Raslag debuts on the local bourse today.
And TV5 chairman Manny V. Pangilinan says the TV network is in an evolving and dynamic discussion with ABS-CBN over a potential partnership. We begin our broadcast with economists forecasting inflation to have surged past 5% in the month of May.
That's on the back of the continued increase in global crude and food prices. A Businessworld poll of 16 analysts yielded a median estimate of 5.4% CPI for May. This matches the midpoint of the 5 to 5.8% forecast earlier given by Bangko Sentral Governor Ben Jokno. If realized, the inflation in May would be the quickest since November 2018. This would also be faster than the 4.9% CPI in April 2022 and would exceed the government's target band of 2 to 4% for this year. Oil remains to be a major driver of inflation, with crude prices soaring above $100 a barrel since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Economists also flag higher food, transport, and utility costs due to lingering supply chain issues. Global food prices have gone up due to the war in Ukraine, as well as the previous lockdowns in Shanghai and major cities in China. Inflation data will be released tomorrow.
Now, concerns about inflation have also dampened consumer confidence. In fact, data from the Bangko Sentral show that its consumer confidence fell in the second quarter of the year. Now, aside from inflation, the Bangko Sentral attributes this drop to low incomes and high unemployment. Still, households remain optimistic with a positive outlook on spending for the next 12 months, rising to over 30%. This on the back of hopes for more available jobs, additional income, salary increases, and good governance.
Now, heads up motorists, another big-time oil price hike is in the offing. Uni Oil projects that prices of diesel could increase by up to 6 pesos and 50 centavos per liter by tomorrow. Gasoline prices are likewise expected to rise up by 2 pesos and 70 centavos. Year-to-date adjustments for oil prices stand at a net increase of nearly 24 pesos per liter for gasoline and over 30 pesos per liter for diesel and more than 27 pesos per liter for kerosene. The Energy Department explained that the looming oil price hike could be attributed to the Russian oil exports ban in Europe, the historical surge in demand, and the end of lockdowns in China.
All these factors actually contributed to the increasing price for next week and probably for the coming, not only next week, but for the coming week, unless there is another event that will actually offset this trend.
Kicking off the trading week, we have a newcomer on the bourse. Dan, how is solar firm Raslag doing on its debut?
Not too bad, Jess. As you know, Raslag had priced its IPO at 2 pesos and it's now trading at 2 pesos and 22 centavos. So not too bad. It's actually already pared back its gains. The high, which has been reached just ahead, like 1 minute before trader, right when it opened, was at 2 pesos and 48 centavos. So not too bad, close to 30% of an increase there. Now, just to remind our viewers here, this is, of course, a pioneer in solar power development. And they have sold 350 million shares, so they've already raised 700 million pesos in this IPO. Now, related to that, Jess, I did want to check in on our other solar players here. You've got, of course, C-REIT, which had Citicorp, which had, of course, also debuted just recently. That is flattish today, but take a look at AC Energy, that's up by 1 8/8%. SPNEC, the one of Nueva Ecija of Sandro Leviste, that's up by Leandro Leviste, rather, that's up by 1 2/10%. of 8%, and AP is down, but again, quite a positive light in terms of our solar stocks. Now, Jess, here to chat with us about RASLAG and more. We have with us, of course, Royce Aguilar of First Metro Securities. Good morning, Royce, and welcome back.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Okay, Royce, now while we're at it, very, very volatile times in terms of our index, but when we look at newcomers, these kinds of debuts, what's your sense of that? Or why are investors still excited over IPOs, and there's still a lot of fundraising going on in the equity space?
I think it depends on the sector now. If you take a look at, it's a good thing you pointed out the solar, the renewable energy sector, mainly because that's the future, right? If you take a look at overseas, solar, renewable energy, electric vehicles, that's the future, right? And investors here in the Philippines recognize that. And if you take a look at the specific catalyst and the specific use of proceeds, that's the more important thing for investors. Mm-hmm. That's what's driving the positive sentiment, especially for RASLAG. I believe they plan to boost their capacity significantly in the coming years. So that's what's driving positive sentiment right now.
Okay, now this of course has a lot to do with energy security, with prices of oil surging here. Now let's go back to that whole issue. What are investors pricing in terms of the level of oil, the prices of oil? Just to take a quick check, it's already closing in on 120. There's another round of price hikes. Hindi pa ba tapos for this inflationary pressure?
Well, that's a problem because if you take a look at what happened last week, oil prices, coal prices surged last week because there was this phased ban implemented by the European leaders on Russian oil. So Russia exports a lot of oil. If you take a look at a global perspective, and that's what's driving oil prices right now, especially for the Philippines, we're feeling the brunt since we're a net oil importer. Hence the significant oil price hike tomorrow. And it's too early to say we're out of the woods. Definitely, we're not out of the woods yet. So there's possible more pain ahead.
Okay, so this can still go higher despite the fact that the ban was already in place. I mean, it was announced basically last week. Still some risks on the table. What about the other offshore issues here apart from the Russia-Ukraine war? There is, of course, the U.S. Fed hiking, but also related to that, strong jobs report that they released, quite a strong economy, and then China also sort of easing their COVID protocols. As you mentioned already, there's quite some robust demand for oil there. Tell us, is that in any way tempering the global outlook of growth?
I think in terms of growth, what's more affecting, it's more on the cost side of the household. Definitely the demand is there, but the demand can be tempered mainly because of higher costs. For example, here in the Philippines, we're seeing significant reopening already, right? But when you try to travel, you try to temper your costs if you're driving a car, right? Because oil prices are significantly surging, and that's what we are seeing also globally, especially the transportation costs. And there's also supply chain disruption. If you take a look at what's happening in China, they just eased curbs last June 1. But prior to that, there was significant problems in terms of supply chain. So that's also affecting costs globally. So that's the situation right now. Of course, if you take a look at data-wise for U.S. inflation set to come out this week, the data is set to come out like lower than the previous month, but it's still high at 8.2%. So there may be signs of peak, but definitely costs are still high.
Okay, Royce, can you nuance this for us? Because I know that you're very linked to the consumer stocks in particular. What has consumption been like ba talaga? I mean, has this been dented? Has it been better than expected with the reopening of the economy? And is this reflected in the index? Can we say that the index level is showing the consumer confidence levels, at least for the year?
Well, for the consumers, the top line has improved. The problem is the bottom line. Margins has been significantly lower, and even the guidance is not that optimistic, right? So if you take a look at what has been reflected in the market, there's still some upside. But as for us, for example, our initial year-end forecast was around 8.7. Right now, we lowered it to 7.2. Diba? That's a significant downgrade, but that's reflecting on the tempered outlook by consumer companies and other sectors as well. So
Okay.
for the market, there's still some upside. Definitely 0% exposure is not recommended, but you don't need to be aggressive at this kind of market. That's our takeaway there.
Can you talk about technicals here and whether you're worried about the so-called death cross with the 50-day going down below the 200-day average in this graph?
Yeah, so that's a point of concern. It's good that you pointed that out on a point of technical analysis, right? So that's usually a bearish signal. But just to simplify a bit, if you take a look at for the past 3 weeks, the market has struggled to go above the 6.8 level. That's like a initial resistance area for us, and that signified that the difficulty of the market to trade above 6.8 signals that we're not out of the woods yet, and we can go lower from here. But of course, fundamental wise, there's upside. As we've mentioned, we should focus on the key reopening winners, but price action wise, we're not out of the woods yet. There could still be some downside.
Well, what's the catalyst domestically for us to go back to the levels we were seeing, just even earlier in the year?
Number one, easing inflation, but of course, the main catalyst there is the easing of the Ukraine-Russia issue, which for now we're not seeing any positive developments yet. So that's still the main issue there.
Okay, so offshore talaga yung problems. All right, Royce, just directing your attention here to one specific sector I'm interested in, which is the banks, because it's one of two sectors with mining and oil that are positive year to date.
Correct.
Why is that, given that inflation is higher, obviously interest rates might be going up as well, maybe bode well for banks, but also might restrict their loan portfolio. Why is this a sector that people are picking up?
Well, as for the mining sector, it's mostly because of higher commodity prices. We're seeing likes of coal, we're seeing the likes of nickel prices significantly shot up this year because of the Ukraine-Russia issue. But of course, on the positive note, for the nickel, there's a long-term catalyst, specifically the electric vehicle side, right? But unfortunately, the catalyst for that segment is mostly the Ukraine-Russia issue. So it's more of a balancing act. Once Ukraine-Russia issue eases, the commodity prices should also ease. So that's the expectation moving forward. As for the banks, you mentioned it right. It's mostly the expectation of rising interest rate environment. Of course, that's also a risk that given the situation right now, that could impact the gains of loan growth moving forward. But investors are more positive on the fact that we're reopening, businesses are reopening. Of course, higher costs are still there, but the fact that we're significantly opening, economic data supports that we have enough capacity to spend. That's what's driving the banking sector right now.
Okay, and before we let you go, Royce, how should we play the portfolio at this point? Should we be sticking to those sectors like you mentioned, energy, renewable energy, mining, the ones that have been benefiting, unfortunately, by this Russia-Ukraine war? Or should we be looking into smaller stocks, the ones that are doing IPOs right now that seem to be doing pretty well? Or should we have faith in, the blue chips?
Right. So actually, what we tell our clients is, of course, right now you should have a bit of cash. So let's say you have 25 to 50% cash, right? So the 50 to 75% you will use on mix of reopening winners, banking sector, consumer discretionary, property, right? And then you can mix a bit of REITs or dividend-paying names such as telco. So that's the suggested mix right now. The more important thing here is you should be exposed, but you should also have cash, just to save for rainy day, just in case the market situation gets worse.
All right, so cautiously tread the markets at this time, but do focus on the sectors that stand to gain from these interest rates. Thank you so much. That was, of course, Royce Aguilar of First Metro Securities.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, everyone.
Inflation is also in focus in major economies this week. Let's get more details courtesy of Bloomberg Week Ahead.
It is a massive week ahead on the eco front. Let's take a look at the major events that we're tracking in the next few days. Inflation will once again dominate. Markets are looking for more signs that price pressures have peaked in the US and in that Chinese data on Friday. But ahead of that, the RBA is set to lead a number of major policy decisions. A hike is expected as it tries to get ahead of its own inflation problem. Of course, we don't quite have that wage price spiral here in Australia just yet. But looking at the ECB as well, they're expected to announce the end of its net bond buying and set the stage for a rates lift-off in July. ECB President Christine Lagarde will be scrutinised for any comments on a potential 50 basis point move, and we'll be getting that barrage of data out of China, credit, trade data due alongside those key inflation numbers. Sherry.
So Heidi, that May CPI print will help clarify that key question you asked: has inflation peaked? At least here in the U.S., right? The fate of the bond markets hanging on that question, with benchmark Treasury yields swinging back and forth in the last month. It's now flirting with that psychologically important 3% level after rising on Friday's robust jobs numbers. Here's what our earlier guests had to say about the numbers.
These are still very strong numbers.
This was actually a little bit stronger report.
The Fed's going to be aggressively raising rates by, say, 50 basis points a meeting for the next few meetings.
There's nothing that's going to stop them from continuing this march of 50 basis point increases.
The side effect of that is going to be that you're going to see a slowdown in the pace of job creation.
This is the last solid report you're going to get for a long time.
Is this going to lead to a slowdown in growth?
It needs to thread the needle and do the exact right amount of hikes so that, they can engineer a soft landing.
I still have a pretty high conviction that our softish landing is going to be realized.
You can't get the Fed really out of the business of focusing on the number one priority, which is getting inflation down.
Today's number further confirms that they still have, a lot of wood to chop in terms of taming the inflation that we're seeing.
Pausing for a quick break, but coming right up. The local bourse issues tighter rules on backdoor listing to provide more protection to shareholders and potential investors.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us. Wala.
And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The Treasury reports that gross borrowings dropped by 28% as of end April, bringing the total to 1.18 trillion pesos. That's lower than the 1.6 trillion pesos posted in the same period last year. For April alone, gross borrowings plunged by 62% to 101 billion pesos. That's as more repayments were made during that month.
Now, transport groups vowed to hold President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to his promise of improving the country's transport system. Jem Avancenia has the details.
The National Transport Coalition will be submitting a transport agenda to incoming President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. That's according to Transport Group Piston's President Modi Floranda. In a press conference on Saturday, Floranda explained some of the highlights of the said agenda. Some of the issues they want to address are the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program and excise tax.
Magpapile ng transport agenda kaya incoming of President ng ating bansa. At ang una nga dito yung nagkakaisa na ibasura yung usapin ng bugus at huwad na modernization.
During the campaign, Floranda said that BBM promised to improve the country's transport system. Transport groups hope that the said promise will be fulfilled.
Nadala na tayo sa 6 na taong singkag ng panunungkulan ni Duterte. Yan din yung isang pangako ni Duterte noon na ayusin niya yung public transport. Pero ang nangyari ay 6 na taong nakabingid yung kabuhay at karapatan ng public transport.
Piston also criticized how the MMDA managed the traffic system in NCR. Floranda said number coding is not the solution to NCR's traffic problem.
Dapat ang pag-resolve sa problema, sa pinang-traffic, tinitingnan yung kabuuan. Ginawa nila sa EDSA yan eh.
For News 5, Jem Avancenia, we are One News.
Now on to some updates in Sorsogon. PHIVOLCS says it has yet to monitor any other eruption in Mount Bulusan following yesterday's phreatic explosion. PHIVOLCS Director Renato Solidum tells Radio 5 that there are still smoke coming out of the volcano's crater and some steam from its northwest side. Land cracks were also spotted around the area, which is why the danger zone has been extended to at least 6 kilometers from Mount Bulusan. Solidum says it's still possible for smaller, steam-driven eruptions to happen at least after a week. PHIVOLCS advises residents living near the volcano to stay away from the permanent danger zone. Now on the corporate front, this from the Philippine Star, the PSC has issued tighter rules on backdoor listing to provide additional protection for shareholders and potential investors. Under the new rules, backdoor listing is deemed to occur if the listed company acquires shares or assets of an unlisted company, with the transaction resulting in a change in control or de facto control of the listed company and substantial change in business of the listed company. The PSC says any backdoor listing will need approval of at least 2/3 of the entire membership of the board of the firm's independent directors. Backdoor listed companies are also required to conduct a public offering of at least 10% of its issued and outstanding shares within a year from closing or completion of transaction.
Now, TV5 Chairman Manny V. Pangilinan says the network is in talks with ABS-CBN over a potential partnership. And he describes the discussions as, quote, evolving and dynamic. But Pangilinan told Bloomberg that nothing definite or final has been reached at this time. This is in response to reports saying the two media companies are in advanced talks for a 50-50 venture. Past discussions between the two networks, however, have led to partnership programs, co-production, and talent sharing. MVP says all these have been, quote, mutually productive.
And that's a first look into the business day this Monday, June 6, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.